Okay, everybody, again, thank you for joining our town hall today. We are so excited to have a wonderful panel here. Today's topic is people, pets, and policies. But before I introduce our wonderful panelists, and before we get started, there are housekeeping items to share. And although I hate housekeeping items, I think the folks that are producing this webinar will be really upset if I don't share them. So here goes. Everyone is automatically muted for the presentation portion of the webinar so that you don't have to worry about accidentally unmuting yourself. I know that our corporate counsel, Rebecca Huss, would love to mute me at times, but she doesn't have that capability right now. So if you have a question at any point, please type it in the Q&A box. There are no stupid questions, and nobody else can see the questions. So, so again, we just see them on our end, and we will try to basically answer them to the best of our ability. We may pause throughout the presentation to answer questions from the Q&A if they are relevant to the topic at hand, but we will also have scheduled time for any additional questions at the end of the presentation. So please keep an eye on the chat box for links to important resources like imla.org. These plus more will also be posted to the resources section of the Town Hall webpage sometime tomorrow. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available after the session via our website. And so hopefully you can share it with your friends. So right now, I would love to introduce our incredibly great panel of panelists. We have the wonderful Chuck Thompson, who is the IMLA's Executive Director and General Counsel, and who knows everything about city laws and constitutionality that you would like to know. And we have Anna Shoemaker, an Assistant County Attorney for El Paso, Texas. And Anna is wonderfully versed in the successful community cat program that El Paso is running. And we have, of course, Rebecca Huss. What can I say about Rebecca, except that she is the General Counsel for Best Friends Animal Society, who got roped into this endeavor many years ago by being the special master / guardian, and I probably said that wrong, of the Michael Vick case, if any of you remember that. So again, we want to start now. So basically, here we go. If I can figure out how to advance the slides. Yes. So Chuck, I'd love it if you could give us some tips on what it means to be a city attorney. You were one for years, a county attorney, and what folks can do to basically help with this or relating to the city attorney.
Thanks, Leedy. I'm really delighted to be here and have participated with Best Friends in working on some policies and the guidebook that we call People, Pets, and Policies, right? I've worked with Best Friends beginning several years ago in amending the IMLA model animal control law that was breed specific, so that we got out of regulating dogs as breed specific and really focused on the fact that a dog, by virtue of its breed, is not necessarily dangerous. It's the dog's temperament that may lead to it being dangerous, and so we attempted to regulate dogs that were dangerous and not dogs based on their breed. Following that, we started to look at other policies that we could work together and collaborate on. And I think we came up with some really interesting policies, some where we had quite a bit of disagreement, but others not so much. There are certainly a lot of things in the policy manual that I think are helpful to communities. They include the fact that as we address the homeless crisis, that many communities will prohibit people who have pets from bringing them to homeless shelters. And that is a hurdle to letting them escape from homelessness. And so we talk about trying to eliminate those hurdles and allowing people to stay with their pets. I am only here for a few minutes by way of overview. And one of the things Leedy did want me to talk about was how might you best work with your city or county attorney? And I was a county attorney for about 30 years before I became the director of IMLA. And what I would tell you is that a county attorney or a city attorney's major focus is going to be on public safety. And so if you have issues that you need to address involving animal control or animal protection, you need to look at those issues and recognize that the focus of the city attorney, county attorney, will be on public safety and not necessarily just on the protection of animals. They will consider and want to consider the protection of animals, but they are going to primarily be focused on how best to protect public safety and to create animals from being a public nuisance or a nuisance to the neighbors. So that's how you need to look at it from their perspective. When you come up with solutions, try to come up with non-controversial solutions, because they are the easiest ones to get through. The more controversial the solution, the less likely you're going to get buy-in from the city or county attorney. And last but not least, I know when I first started as a county attorney, the community's law regulated animals by prohibiting, for example, a dog from being at large. Well, I think we all agree that it's probably a good idea to have a prohibition against the dog being at large, but you regulate the owner, not the dog. And so the ordinance should be saying that an owner may not allow a dog to be at large, because if what your ordinance says is the dog may not be at large, who do you ticket? You can't ticket the dog, and that just doesn't work. So be cognizant of how you're asking a regulation to be put in place. Be cognizant primarily of public safety issues. And last but not least, let me say that the introduction was far too generous, and that I think Anna Schumacher is probably a lot brighter and a lot more capable of talking about the legal issues than I ever will be. And with that, I have to leave. And I apologize for leaving early, but this has been a terrific relationship with Best Friends and a terrific policy manual. One last thing, we do have a webinar we're doing with Best Friends on December 1 at IMLA. It is for CLE, for those lawyers who need continuing legal education credit. We'd welcome you joining us, and that is on December 1. You can get it at our website, www.imla.org. And thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Leedy. It's been a wonderful time working with you. I appreciate it. Take care.
You too, Chuck. And again, thank you so much for taking time out, and go catch that ferry so you're not late. Chuck lives on an island, by the way. So anyway, so here we go. If I can, again, figure out how to do this. Yes. So why community supported sheltering? I mean, we know that everything has changed since COVID, and hopefully, that you're seeing some good changes that can be placed in, put into place to help save animals. So, it's important because 81% of Americans believe that it's important to have no-kill shelters in their area. So it's publicly supported. And again, city officials like that. 59% of folks said they'd sign a petition to require no-kill animal shelters in their area. So again, that's a majority. City council members, city attorneys like it if there's a majority of people who are willing to support something. And again, 57 are willing to donate to help make it happen. So hopefully you and municipal shelters have some sort of friends of organization where you can try to get folks to help, to donate to help you achieve that. So, there's a lot of dogs in the United States. Dogs are extremely popular. And we did a poll back in 2014, 84% of Americans don't believe the government should tell you what type of breed of dog they can own. And so, again, it's just, you want to focus on the behavior of the dog and the behavior of the owner, because we know, like Chuck mentioned, we all want safe and humane communities for people and pets. So some of the things you could think about is, one, You want to target all dangerous dogs based on their behavior. And you want to, make sure that reckless owners are targeted too. One of the things that you might talk about when meeting with a city attorney is the fiscal impact of what these policies they're proposing might have. So these are outdated breed, ordinances, that target certain breeds of dogs that, basically discriminate against pet owners with these breeds of dogs. And they can be bans, or they can be, automatically declaring a certain breed of dog dangerous, vicious, or wild. We've seen some ordinances that will say you can't have a lion, tiger, or a pit bull or German shepherd. I mean, that's just crazy. So again, we want ordinances that focus on behavior, because if you focus on behavior, that impacts the safety of a community. And it leads to a lot of lawsuits, breed restrictive laws do. Here's one from Nelson versus Town of New Llano in Louisiana, where a pit bull ban was challenged in federal court. And a preliminary injunction was issued because there was a substantial likelihood of success on the merits. Because again, these laws do not enhance public safety. And just some of the things that were problematic in New Llano were, the constitutional challenges of procedural due process. There was no right to a hearing to challenge the findings. And again, dogs, we love them, but they are people's property, and you can't take away property without due process of law. And they had an impermissible $200 pay to play provision. So if you wanted to challenge it, you had to put up $200, which that meant the poor people really couldn't challenge the government taking their dog. The law's definition of pit bull was vague. Some parts of the law said predominantly pit bull, and others said of a pit bull, heritage. And visual identification is extremely flawed. We know that now because of the Canine Genome Project and DNA testing. So this is one of my favorite slides. And again, I've used this before, so some of you are like, oh, I've seen this, but bear with me because these are all purebred dogs. And I still think it's fascinating that we have so many purebred dogs that are really short-haired and muscular and hard to tell apart, even if you are, a veterinarian or a shelter worker. So that is the only American Pit Bull Terrier in this photo array. And most animal control, animal services, field officers that I share this with, they, maybe one in about 20 will get it right. So again, breed doesn't matter, behavior does. This was a friend of mine's dog who, when DNA testing first came out, she had, she always thought she had adopted a pit bull. She was very proud of it. She has a Whippet Dalmatian boxer mix, mostly Whippet. That really shocked her. Kind of shocks me too, looking at the photo. But again, she loves her dog. She's a responsible owner. That's all that should matter to the government. And all these dogs that have, come from shelters, they might have been classified as pit bulls at their shelters, are pit bull-like dogs, are American Staffordshire Terriers, but they have none in them. So again, you can't judge a book by its cover. My mother always told me that, and she was correct. And these little dogs in this photo array are some of the big dogs, all have an intermediate amount of Amstaff or Staffy Bull Terrier, which pit bulls are derived from. So again, and some of them, they have little wire hair. You would never guess that they are part pit bull that would have been impacted by that New Llano ordinance, if they were of, a pit bull terrier mix. So again, it doesn't matter. And, the IMLA got rid of their breed-specific provision on their model dangerous dog ordinance in 2018. I was hoping that most cities would embrace that and do that. Overland Park in Kansas just got rid of their pit bull ban, I want to say a month ago. So that was wonderful. But I went to the Kansas cities and looked up how many cities in Kansas still have these outdated laws. There were more than 80. I mean, that's just unacceptable. And some of these laws violate the ADA because municipality can't discriminate against a person with a restricted or banned breed service animal. You know, they can't just say all German Shepherds, all Rottweilers, all Chows, or Chihuahuas are bad. You know, basically these dogs are individuals. And there are some FHA considerations also, because the FHA has a more expansive definition of assistance animal than the ADA. So again, these are things that you and your city attorney should be aware of. So we want you to target reckless pet owners, because you all know that oftentimes these people are recidivists. This is from Bizarro.com, and I love this cartoon because beware of dog, beware of jerk with masculinity issues. And again, you know, not to be sexist, because, you know, women can be jerks too, but a lot of it is targeting the owner that basically will take a dog, will make it mean, you'll take that dog will probably end up euthanized, and then they'll get another dog. So we need to prevent them from owning dogs until they can become responsible owners. So again, for a period of time, and that's what the IMLA model ordinance does. So again, if you need a copy, you can, you know, email me at ladyv@bestfriends.org. But the IMLA model ordinance has potentially dangerous, and vicious categories. It allows for immediate impoundment, again, because we want safe and humane communities. But it also allows for due process. So there are hearings and appeals that are necessary. And it has a reckless owner provision that, you know, again, targets the source of the problem. And it's a really, really good ordinance. But breed discrimination is found not only in city ordinances, but oftentimes in housing. And, you know, we found that nearly 90% of landlords do not allow pets, or if they allow pets or might be pet friendly, they might put restrictions on the weight of the pet, the breed, the size, the type, or the number. And some of it is pretty ridiculous. Like, you can't own a dog over 15 pounds or 25 pounds. You know, a lot of the dogs in the shelters weigh 50 pounds or 60 pounds. So again, this is an extreme problem. MyPitBullIsFamily.org, if you go on their website, they try to track rentals in various areas of the nation, and they always are looking for volunteers, but their rental resource dashboard is wonderful. And it can show you, you can click on your community, and it can show you the lack of pet inclusive housing in your area. So again, you know, we suggest that you consider a pet housing ordinance, because nationally, housing is the #1 reason why dogs are relinquished, and the #2 reason why cats are relinquished to animal shelters. Indeed, the Chicago Housing Authority, they have a weight limit on cats of 15 pounds. It's crazy. You know, what do? Have a scale in the lobby? So again, we are trying to get cities to enact really good housing ordinances. So now I'm going to ask the wonderful Anna to take it away.
Thank you, Lady. And thank you everyone for letting me be on. This is a really important issue, actually, and I think one that impacts a lot of communities now that we're seeing that there's this really great need for affordable housing. And unfortunately, what I am personally finding is that a lot of times in these very important negotiations with developers, right, that pets and people are often, you know, an afterthought at best in these conversations, when really these counties and these municipalities have so much leverage that if they had brought this to the forefront of the conversation, really could have made a difference. I actually went on to that website, the dashboard that Lee just shared, and in El Paso, I can tell you that only 10 groups came up. We are a pretty poor community. A large part of our community is. I also went and I looked at basically a website that offers affordable housing. There are 450 landlords that are listed, and 83 said they were pet friendly. But as Lady pointed out, I mean, that can mean all sorts of things, right? So knowing that we have this affordable housing crisis looming, right? What can you all do today? And that's why LA County's and LA City's ordinance is so important, because they collaborated together, right, to say that if you are going to receive public financing from the city or the county, right, then we're going to protect our tenants' right to have these pets. And they did that in a really forward-looking way. So if you look at section 51.20 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code, they're acknowledging that in the upcoming decade, they're going to have at least another 500,000 affordable housing units. And that's a lot. But knowing that, what they're saying is that they want to today, through this ordinance, lay the groundwork to avoid tenants from having to choose between their pets or where they're going to live. And so basically what this is saying, that subject to applicable laws, right, that pet ownership should not be a barrier to individuals and families who qualify for publicly financed rental housing. And so I know that there's a lot of text on this slide, so I'll break it down into a few elements. So really there's 6 subparts to this ordinance. And the first one is that if you are an applicant, so you can't even be denied if you're an applicant, or you are the tenant of a rental unit in a housing development that is publicly financed by or through the city, or even if you later come to receive public financing, then you can't reject that tenant or applicant on the basis of pet ownership, nor can you be denied the ability to have at least one pet per unit. Now, in addition to that, right, and this is something that I think a lot of us think is a really great idea, is that pet that you're going to keep in your unit, in order for you to have it there, it has to be spayed or neutered, it has to be microchipped, it has to be vaccinated, and if required, licensed, right? So again, what Chuck said is making sure, right, that you're a proponent of safety through these ordinances. And so that's what this ordinance is doing. The third element to this ordinance is that the pet deposit has to be reasonable and refundable, and only be used to pay for reasonable expenses that are directly related to the presence of the pet in the unit, such as cost of repairs. And the reason why this is so important, right, is because a lot of times these pet deposits are so cost prohibitive. And one of the apartments that actually came up on that dashboard that I researched, it was actually an apartment complex. It was very nice that I lived in when I was first married. And I can tell you that I wasn't able to bring my dog along because the fee that I had to pay for my pet that was non-refundable was so high. And so the fact that they are saying that, you know, it has to be reasonable and refundable would definitely help people be able to bring along their pets. The other element is that policies are developed with the help of animal services, so that you can ensure that these policies for these units are safe, and they're going to ensure responsible ownership, which is what Leedy was talking about. And then in addition to that, landlords have to provide their tenants a copy of that policy. And then the fifth element, of this ordinance is that this is in no way intended to limit the rights of an individual with a disability who might maintain an animal to provide assistance or support. And then finally, the sixth element to this ordinance is that they do take into account that there may be instances that it's necessary to remove the animal from the unit, right? And those instances include if there's a violation of the law, the animal has become a nuisance, or it's a threat to the health and safety of either the tenants of that unit or that community, or the community at large where that dwelling exists. So next slide, please, and we'll transition over to cats, which is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart here in El Paso. So essentially what community cats are, it's a humane and safe way to control the cat population. I can tell you that here in El Paso, in January of 2016, our live release rate for our shelter was 53%, which is, basically 50-50, that if you took a pet in or an animal into animal services, it was going to come out alive. And so it was for that reason that the city manager at the time basically created a task force in January of 2016 to turn that around. And he wanted the city to get to a 90% live release rate in 5 years, which isn't a lot of time. And so essentially what this task force did is they presented in January of 2016, 11 recommendations to City Council. And I can tell you that the very first thing on that list was TNR. So basically February of the following month, they took this ordinance 018472 to City Council to adopt amendments to Title VII. So this took effect in March of 2016. And I can tell you, and I'll go through a little bit of this ordinance, that 5 years later, we were hovering at 90%. So I know that it works. So some of the elements that we basically worked into our ordinance, and I can't take credit for writing it. It was written actually by Josette Flores, who is a brilliant attorney and actually a huge animal advocate. But she was very forward thinking in her development of this ordinance that actually predates the ABA's model for community cats in the TNR program. And essentially, you have to look at the definitions first and foremost, right? So how are you defining an ear-tipped cat, right? So essentially what an ear-tipped cat is that you are allowing a veterinarian to take a 1/4 inch diagonal cut off of the ear of a cat that has been brought in, right? Because it's not already spayed or neutered, so it doesn't have that ear tipped the ear tip on its ear. And so once it's been brought in, then it's sterilized, right? So it's spayed or neutered, it's vaccinated, and then it's returned to the place that it was found. So we definitely took time to carve that out in our definitions. The other thing that's important is, right, what is ownership? So ownership, right, generally in El Paso used to mean that you are housing, caring for an animal for at least 72 hours. So what we did is we exempted community cats from that provision. The other thing that we did is, right, once you return that cat to the place that you found it, that does not constitute abandonment. So you want to make sure that you're also adjusting your definition of abandonment if you have that in your code. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so a couple more elements to what we put forth in our ordinance. So one is that we created a defense to prosecution from a restraint charge if you have a TNR cat on your property. The other thing, right, is that if you have a cat that's not per se staying on your own premises, but it's a TNR cat, right, then you're not going to be subject to prosecution for that, because we understand, right, that it's not going to stay on one particular premises. The other thing that we did is that we said that TNR cats, which you would think is very common sense, are not subject to impoundment, right? So once you see that a cat is missing that tip of its ear, don't bring it in unless it's injured or ill. However, we also take into account that could happen, right? That one of these TNR cats could be brought in by accident, right? And if so, it's not subject to the holding period that most other animals would be subject to. The other thing that we say is if it's impounded and we can't find any proof of ownership, it's not already been TNR'd, then it can be subject to the TNR protocol. Additionally, if you are going to bring in a cat, say you have a cat on your property, you want to make it subject to TNR, then you wouldn't be required to microchip or register that cat. You could, right? And you could pay the fee and you could do that, but you wouldn't be required to do that. And then, thank you, some of the additional tools to consider as you're developing the TNR process in your community is, at least in Texas, right, subject to the Texas Health and Safety Code, Chapter 823, there's already a requirement that if you have a shelter in your community, that you have an advisory commission. One of the greatest things that we have is that some of these community cat advocates and organizations are part of that advisory commission, and they've been invaluable. The other thing that you can do is have a memorandum of understanding with those groups, right? So that you are best utilizing each other's resources to accomplish the greater TNR goals. Additionally, with regards to community stakeholders, you want to make sure that if you can, right, your assistant city attorneys, assistant county attorneys are developing interlocals, which are basically agreements with another government, to make sure that you are all on the same team. You are all advocating for the community cat program. I can tell you that here in El Paso, when we started it, not every smaller municipality or federal organization was necessarily on board. But because they didn't have a shelter and they needed us, right? We leveraged that to get them to sign this interlocal saying that they were going to participate and support the community cat program. The other thing that I would really highly recommend is that you in that interlocal really streamline protocols, because different people can have different ideas. And so you are really able to narrow those expectations through that interlocal. Then some additional resources to consider is professional service agreements with your vets. Here in El Paso, we really have a shortage of vets, which I believe is a national issue. So you can do it with very limited vets. We have one incredibly heroic vet in animal services who is doing a tremendous amount of these TNRs. However, I can tell you that she also relies on the assistance of other veterinarians that are maybe not able to be full-time, but support. And so another resource is creating these vet relief agreements. And then some of the other things that, to highlight is that you maybe have some equipment or you maybe have a property that you're not using because you're understaffed. Then could you lease that or rent it or loan it to another organization that may be able to carry out some of these TNRs? I know that's something that has been really helpful here in El Paso, like a mobile vet unit. We've been able to lease out. So maybe the city itself isn't doing some of these TNRs, but there's another vet that can. And then the last and perhaps most important element to all of this is to really promote public relations to make sure that the community is understanding what this is all about. So I actually took a screenshot of this a few months ago when I first moved to the neighborhood that I'm currently in. And just a few days ago, the same topic again. It seems to come up about once a month here, at least in my local Nextdoor app. And it's really encouraging to see that people, neighbors themselves are asking, one, hey, I have these kittens, what can I do with them? And you have other community members without the need to reach out to animal services or call 311 are answering what they can do and talking about the community cat program. And so when you have more neighbors sharing with other neighbors what it's about, it just perpetuates a cycle of knowledge and also people willing to collaborate to make the community cat program work. Next slide, please. Thank you. One of the things to also, though, keep in mind, right, is that some of the people who are most against community cats are, people that say they're a nuisance. And so another thing that it's important to do is educate people that are really wanting to do the right thing by helping out these community cats, know how not to create a nuisance, right? So offer suggestions at a homeowners association, right? Like maybe you feed the cats early in the morning or in the evening or in biodegradable bowls. There's all sorts of different solutions. You can't see it very well maybe in this picture, but this person has actually put out animal bait around the bowls. And this is something that's pretty close to my house. The other thing, unfortunately, to also potentially work into your ordinance and also keep in mind as you're educating the public, right, is that you are going to penalize the use of poisons or toxins for someone that's trying to eliminate cats. I wish I didn't have to say that, but it does happen. So it's important to have that built in, knowing that those people who do that will be prosecuted. Next slide, please. And then finally, with regards to humane trapping, you want to ensure that the traps that you are either loaning or using are really safe and properly functioning traps. The worst thing would be, right, which we've heard about sometimes, is that it's an old trap that wasn't really working well and just terrible things can happen. So it's so easy, just use safe and properly functioning traps. The other thing is make sure you're providing food and water and shelter, right? Here in El Paso, it's incredibly hot. So if you're going to trap a cat early in the morning and go to work and leave it without food or water, that would really be a bad idea. So make sure you're considering what time of day you're going to do the trapping and that it has sufficient food, water, and shelter. And then finally, and also equally important, is that a cat that is trapped, it's so important for the community cat program that you are returning it to the space that you found it in, right? So you wouldn't want to take it to another neighborhood when you're done, or you wouldn't want to take it to the desert just because it's already familiar with the area that it was trapped in. So that's really an important element to TNR cats. So I'll turn it back over to Leedy, but thank you so much for your time.
And I will turn it over to the wonderful Rebecca. So Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you, Leedy. Hopefully I'll pop up. So I have put some cute kittens sleeping on my slide because I know you just want to spend more time talking about liability issues. I think the big focus I want to talk to folks about just for a few minutes today is disclosure issues. But before we get to that point, I just want to call out the documentation. At the beginning of this presentation, Chuck talked about what the attorneys for the municipalities are interested in. And obviously one of the biggest issues that they're concerned about is potential liability. And regardless of whether you're a municipality or whether you're a private entity, you need to protect your organization. And the best way to do that is to have good, strong, clear agreements with you and the folks who are volunteering, whether that's a volunteer at your facility or elsewhere, perhaps through a community CAT program, or volunteering through providing foster home provisions. So just so you know, Lee, I'm not seeing myself. Are you guys seeing me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's a little disconcerting not to see what I look like, but I'll try to keep going. All right. So here's the deal. In the document, the IMLA document, there's some great resources for language for your documents. In addition, I want to just call out, and they'll put in the chat, a link to an agreement that I helped work on through the American Bar Association. So remember, American Bar Association, that's all attorneys. So people who are really concerned with liability issues. And at the beginning of COVID, I am active in the Animal Law Committee for the American Bar Association. We wanted to do something that would be helpful for organizations across the country. And one of the things that we know is that it's sometimes difficult to get attorneys to help you look at your documentation. We wanted to provide a template document for you. So in the chat, they should see a link to the ABA's process, and you'll see that there is some documents on there that should be helpful if you need to update or take another look at your volunteer and foster home agreements. Specifically, you always want to have the obvious, the hold harmless clause, the indemnification, meaning if somebody sues the shelter because of something you did, you're going to be responsible for that as a volunteer. But in addition, the template document also goes through and has lots of different options for the provisions that we normally want to see in a volunteer agreement. Just keep in mind, a volunteer agreement is for everybody. In addition to a volunteer agreement, you might have a separate foster home agreement because there's some differences in allowing somebody to have an animal in their home. And so that's why we have two separate agreements. Here at Best Friends, what happens is if you want to be a foster home, you first sign our volunteer agreement, and then our foster home agreement is an addendum or an amendment to our volunteer agreement. Not a surprise because I'm so concerned with protecting people in the organization. There's some duplication in the foster home agreement, but the key is just to make sure that it's clear that they work together. The other thing I just want to highlight is the who executes. One of the challenges is making sure that you have a process in place to ensure that before an animal goes to a foster home or before you have a volunteer at your facility, that they have the right document executed. If you have the ability to have an online system to try to track this, this is great. But if you have a foster coordinator, whether that's a volunteer or an employee, just making sure that they're confirming that everybody that is interacting with your facility or your animals have actually signed is really important. The other issue with who executes is ideally, and this isn't probably going to be terribly palatable to you if you're trying to get volunteers, is ideally everybody that's an adult in the foster home would be a volunteer, because we all know that whether it's a roommate or a spouse situation or just a live-in type situation, if you're an adult, you're going to be interacting with that animal, even if you're not the primary caretaker of that animal. So from a liability protection perspective, it would be ideal if all the adults were signing. The other thing to consider is, and this will work for some places, but not others, one of the things that we discovered at Best Friends, which was really helpful, is with the exception of one state, New Jersey, we were able to actually pull in our volunteers under our workers' compensation insurance. And that's great because that means there's some additional protection for our volunteers if there is an incident. But the only way it works is if you're actually a volunteer. So that's another reason to try to make sure everybody who's going to be interacting with your animals is an actual volunteer. And you should ask your insurance broker whether it's possible to get a rider for your workers' comp insurance to cover your volunteers as well. And the final thing is the disclosure issue. When we talk about disclosures, I'm going to go through a process for making sure that the disclosures are good, but it is both the documentation, so the notes, and we'll talk about those notes, but it's also making sure that you're having an interactive conversation, whether it's a volunteer to determine their comfort level with dealing with particular types of animals, whether it's a foster home to determine the right type of animal for that foster home, or of course with an adoption to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for that adopter. So conversation and documentation is key. And then the other thing just to remember is that anytime you're transferring an animal, whether it's to another organization or to a private citizen, you need to have documentation. And that documentation is going to look a lot alike in some of these clauses. So there's lots of transfer agreements online. And you know, honestly, when I'm looking at updating my documents, I go and see what other people are doing to see if it's updated, needs to be updated. One of the things we're also doing at Best Friends is just taking another look every year or so to see what's working, what's not working with our agreement. Slide. So the next thing I just want to spend a couple minutes on is making sure we have proper disclosures. The basic rule is if you disclose, if the person who is taking the animal understands and is informed about the potential risk, then the possibility of liability decreases substantially. This format of observe, document, disclose, and transfer is from a California attorney named Bonnie Lutz. She does a lot of work with shelters, and she came up with this. That's a really good way to think about how we make sure that we have proper disclosures. And keep in mind, we disclose not just because of liability, we disclose because we want what's best for the animals. And the only way that the person who's taking the animal is going to be fully informed and be able to care for that animal appropriately is to make sure that they know about all the potential behaviors. So I'll break this down a little bit. Lady, next slide, please. So observe is basically anybody, any staff volunteer. And when we say foster caregiver, again, that's just another specialized volunteer who observes an incident or behavior that happens when the animal's in the care. So this could even be if your animal's at the veterinarian. How can you get that information from the veterinarian? The next step is to document it. And this is, again, a process question. Lawyers love process. How do you make sure that the information about an incident or behavior gets into the right file? So whether you use an online system, again, whether you use a shelter software system, or whether you just keep handwritten notes, how do you make sure that that information is documented? Disclose is you've got to actually disclose it to the people who are going to take the animal, whether that's a volunteer, including a foster home, or whether that's the transfer agent. Keep in mind that there's laws in some states that specify that you have to disclose certain information. Generally, if it involves an animal that has bitten a human that has broken the skin. So California and Virginia are a couple of examples of those states. If you're in one of those states, you're probably very aware of it. And the last thing is transfer. Obviously, transfer is only necessary if you're transferring to an adopter, but it's really important that you transfer the legal title to the animal. That is a liability perspective. You know, I know historically there was a lot of concern about making sure that the animals were cared for. We would argue that the idea is that you should be doing your due diligence in advance. And then if there's really concerns about the care of the animal, the local authorities should be able to step in. That doesn't mean we don't take animals back if they need to. Best Friends uses the language of a lifetime return guarantee, lifetime return policy. We will take any animal that we adopt out back, and I would argue that that's an appropriate thing for an organization to do. But it's messy, as you know, to try to have the possibility of something like potential trespass because you're trying to get an animal back without the local authorities involved. All right, and I know I've got to move through this, and these are very wordy slides. I'm not going to go through each of this language. The key with the disclosures is you want to keep it to the facts. And this is tough. This is hard because people get emotional about things. But think about it as the old time, reporter, who, what, when. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to do analysis, because we don't really know what the dog or the cat is thinking when there was an incident, when there's a bite. All we know is that a bite occurs. So you want to be careful about how you describe. Next slide. So for example, problematic language, and we've actually seen these in disclosures. Problematic language is something like love bite. Well, we all know that especially foster homes want to make sure that their animals get adopted to good homes, but we need to be accurate about it. I don't know what a love bite is, but maybe some of you have seen this or had this been described to you. It's important to describe the actual behavior. What was the actual behavior? Well, if the actual behavior for the quote love bite was I was petting the cat and the cat turned its head and bit me, or I was petting the cat for 45 minutes and the cat turned its head and bit me, that's descriptive. Next slide, please. Better language would be, again, very factual, try to stay factual. And I will say that this can be very challenging to help your volunteers and your employees train into, but it gets easier with time. So be accurate and factual. So what is the situation? Is it a bite? It's not a love bite, it's just a bite. Was there a puncture? Was there a scratch? Next slide. And you'll see that the whole goal is to have a factual description of what happened with appropriate concern. But try to avoid the emotional, try to avoid the alarmist, try to avoid the uncaring. That's not Best Friends' way, and I'm sure it's not your organization's way as well. And try to avoid dismissive. We, again, want to provide accurate disclosures to help these animals be successful in their new homes. And we can only do that if we're describing the behavior or any incidents accurately. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Great. So any questions that anyone may have? And again, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Anna, so much for doing this. Thank you, everybody, for attending. But do we have any questions, or is everyone asleep?
Thanks. Oh, by the way, lady, you totally skipped my lovely disclosure slide. I don't know if anybody else noticed that, but there's a slide at the beginning that I worked really hard on that just said, you need your own lawyer, and she totally skipped that.
So anyway, this is not legal advice, right?
This is just educational.
This is totally educational, So do we have any questions at all?
Lady, are you able to see those in the Q&A box?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought, let me pull it up. Okay. Is there a way to start a community cat program without changing the ordinance? Like getting approval to pilot something outside the ordinance before asking it to be modified? The easy answer is yes. So basically you can do that. Very, very easily, pilot programs. And it's nice if you're afraid that the ordinance might not ever get changed, don't put an expiration date on the pilot program, just have it run indefinitely or until, action of the council. And we've seen some pilot programs that have gone on for years. Anna, do you want to add something to that?
I would just add it, because that's completely right, Lady, is that I think when the ABA put it out, they actually said, construe or, interpret your existing ordinances in such a way that would allow you to carry out the program. So I think that, you could develop a policy, or you can get creative in terms of how you're interpreting that, get with your attorneys to see how you all can make that possible. But for sure, it's doable.
Yeah. And Rebecca, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, this is your policy stuff. I'll let you do
Okay.
that. I would say that, one of the first steps is to look at your local ordinances, right? Your local ordinances might not prevent you from doing a community cat program, or it might be an easier fix than you think. So don't automatically assume your ordinances prevent you from doing it.
Very good for bringing that up. And what's the first step to removing breed bans in your community? Well, basically to start talking to your city council members, you know, and again, talk to them about, you know, the trend is against breed discrimination. Denver got rid of their ban. Aurora got rid, you know, doesn't target pit bulls at all anymore. Overland Park that, you know, defended their pit bull ban in court for, you know, in the 80s. Basically, they got rid of theirs. So the trend is against it. The American Bar Association passed a resolution against breed discrimination. The AVMA, the National Animal Care and Control Association, oppose it. So again, start talking to the city council members, not by just going to the city council meeting. I mean, it's good to go there and see who's influential, but to, you know, like have informal chats with them. If they have, you know, again, call them up on the phone. One of the things that, you know, city council members will talk to you if you call them on the phone. They are elected officials. That's what we're supposed to do. So again, start that conversation and check out the city council, see who's a mover and shaker, try to get them on their side. But we have oodles of stuff on our website, bestfriends.org. You look up Pitbull resources, and we can walk you through it. There's another one. How do you deal with property owners who don't want TNR cats on their properties, especially if you want to release a cat in its original area? Anna, do you want to take that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? So I don't think that you per se have to drop it off exactly at someone's house, right? Like right at their house. But one of the things that is worth having is a discussion with that owner, right? What is the concern? What is the reason that they don't want that cat there? I think a lot of times it's because they don't want, you know, all the things that might come with a community cat, but there's a lot of solutions, right? You can set up these systems that will basically keep the cat from being on their property. You can sprinkle stuff around your house, right? So there's a lot that can be done, and it's actually a really good opportunity to educate that person. So that would kind of be my suggestion.
I like it, I do. And again, there are wonderful videos on cat deterrence. And so on mynextdoor.com, whenever I see someone complaining about a cat, I put the little video in there and say, hey, you know, it's quite easy to keep kitties off your property. And it's been really heartening because a lot of people will chime in and go, oh yeah, you know, don't turn the cat into the shelter, you know, like just keep help, you know, use those things. And they come up with their own solutions, you know. So it's really, as Anna mentioned in her talk, it's nice to see the Nextdoor community really kind of, you know, going to the cat's defense. You know, when people do complain. So I think things are changing big time. So, and let's see if we have any other questions. Okay. So do you find that outdoor feeding for those cats attract more wildlife than desired? I think that it depends on how you feed them. And one of the things, as Anna mentioned, you know, like use tortillas that will dissolve, you know, instead of plates of food, and limit the amount of food you have, and then do it, you know, for only certain parts of time. Don't leave the food there.
The insurance companies and your insurance broker is going to be looking at your past behavior. And so the more you can do to ensure that there's informed, that people are making informed decisions about taking the animals and have the skills to work with the animals, the less likely you're going to have an incident, which means you're more likely to be able to get insurance. So I would separate the issue of potential incidents with the open adoption process. And I know that language can be a little challenging for people sometimes. Think of it as making sure that there's a good match for the adoption. And unfortunately, there's going to be issues with insurance. There always is. But what they're going to look at is they're going to look and see what your history is. And that really is separate from who you're adopting to, as long as you're making it a good match.
Well, I think that's all the questions that are there. Any last minute questions from anyone? If not, again, I want to thank you all for attending tonight's town hall. Again, if the materials shared in the presentation should not be construed as legal advice. So you'll be getting the recordings, I believe, in a few days. And feel free to contact us if you have any questions. But Anna, Rebecca, production team, thank you all. And thank you all for your hard work to keep pets in their families. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.